Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back for this week's edition of Commander Banter. This is episode 9, my 20 favorite blue commander cards. Within reason. I have to make that clear, because there's $1,000 blue cards that aren't on this list, and they probably would be if I was gonna use gold bars for cards or something. You got some bullion lying around, go ahead and use them. Otherwise, half the list at least is a budget list, and the other half, they might be expensive. There's a few on here. It's blue. Blue's an expensive color. So let's start with Trinket Mage. 1 blue, 2 other for a 2/2 human wizard. But when it comes into play, you may search your library for an artifact card with converted mana cost 1 or less, reveal it, put it into your hand. If you do, shuffle your library. This can get you your mana crypts. This can get you your sol rings. This can get you your spell bombs. This can get you... There are so many, mana vaults. There's so many artifacts that cost 1 mana in Commander. This is just a great addition to any blue deck. I use this one a lot, and people wonder why it's on the list. It's Quicken! For 1 blue. The next sorcery spell you play this turn can be played at any time you could play an instant. Draw a card. Want to make your Wrath of God instant speed because they just pulled some crazy Master of the Waves trick and you're about to get run over? Quicken will do it for you. Maybe that's not your thing. Maybe you just want a great big beat stick. The best creature in your opponent's deck. They've printed cards like Bribery for that. 2 blue mana and 3 generic. To search target opponent's library for a creature card and put that card into play under your control. That player then shuffles his or her library. This will hurt anyone who's using a big, dumb, stompy creature in Commander. And since you're playing Commander, where games generally go longer, especially if they're multiplayer, you're going to have a lot of targets for this card. A lot of really good, big, stompy targets. Play their Blightsteel Colossus. See how they feel after that. Maybe they're tricksy. Maybe they got ahead of your game plan. Maybe they tried to actually play their Blightsteel Colossus. Those fools. You have desertion. 2 blue mana, 3 generic mana. Counter target spell. If that spell was an artifact or a creature card, they used to call them summons, put it into play under your control as though you just played it. It gets artifacts too. It's a fun card. I like desertion a lot. Brainstorm. This has to be on here. I guess an alternative would be like Treasure Cruise, but this is even more powerful than that. 1 blue mana for an instant. You can do this during the opponent's turn if you want. Draw 3 cards. Then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. This is a very skill-intensive magic card. Vintage players call it the brainstorm test. When do you brainstorm? What do you put back on top of your library? Is this the proper time to play this card? A lot of times it is, but just play with it and you'll understand the tricks behind it. Now, this is more recent printing. Clever Impersonator, 2 blue and 2 generic mana for a 0/0 shapeshifter. But you may have Clever Impersonator enter the battlefield as a copy of any non-land permanent on the battlefield. Planeswalker, check. Artifact, check. Enchantment, check. Creature, It does it all. It's probably the best clone they've printed, maybe ever. There's only one I would even think about, and this is it. Because it has that little Phyrexian mana symbol there. You can pay that with 2 life instead of the color that it's attached to. Which is ridiculous. So, for 1 Phyrexian blue mana, so let's just say 2 life for the hell of it, and 3 generic mana, you can have Phyrexian Metamorph enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact or creature on the battlefield, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. So you can play this one on the cheap. It can go just good. Just good. You know what else is just good? Dig Through Time. This card was banned in Modern for damn good reason. 2 blue, 6 generic mana for an instant with Delve. So you can exile cards from your graveyard, and each card you exile helps pay the casting cost of the spell by 1 generic mana. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. Put 2 of them into your hand, the rest of the bottom of your library in any order. This will get you out of almost any jam. This is a classic. Time Spiral. It also had a set named after it, which is... I think that's the first time that ever happened. It's a sorcery for 2 blue and 4 generic mana. That's 6 converted mana cost for you. Remove Time Spiral from the game. Each player shuffles his or her graveyard and hand into his or her library. Draw 7 cards. You untap up to 6 lands. Some of those lands you untap might generate more than 1 mana. Remember that. Because you just drew 7 cards and now you're going to play a bunch of stuff. Kind of resets the game, sort of. In a weird way that you can bend to be favored towards you. Here's a very classic Commander staple. It was like a common in the set it was printed in, I think. It might have been uncommon, I can't remember. But it's Cryptic Study. It's an enchantment for 1 blue and 2 other. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may draw a card unless that opponent pays 1 mana. In a big multiplayer game of Commander, you have no idea how many cards you are going to draw off this. People will just forget. People will just not be bothered. And they'll just allow you to sit there and accumulate card after card after card after card. Just because they can't deal with it. And it's so good. This was a classic even when it was a standard card. This is Capsize from Tempest. It's an instant for 1 blue, or 2 blue and 1 generic. But it has buyback 3. Buyback was a mechanic where if you pay the buyback cost, the card goes back into your hand instead of going into your graveyard. And what this spell does is return target permanent to its owner's hand. So once you get 6 mana, you can continuously cast this over and over and over and bounce anything back to their hand. Lands. You can shut them right out of the game just by getting their lands. Any problems? They're not a problem anymore as long as you keep 6 mana up. You're fine. Cyclonic Rift is kind of a... People don't know what to think about this one. Like, there's people calling for it to be banned, and I can understand why. 1 blue, 1 generic for an instant. Return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. It also has Overload for 1 blue and 6 generic mana. That's 7 mana to cast it. You can cast this spell for its Overload cost. If you do, change its text by replacing all instances of target with each. 7 mana. All permanents, all non-land permanents you don't control go to their owner's hands. This is a one-sided board sweep. It'll win you the game. You like these bouncy effects? Here's another classic one from Tempest. Tempest liked its bouncy. Tempest was a great set. 1 blue. 3 generic mana for a 4 converted mana cost. 1 for Spirit with Flying. And you can tap it. And tap 2 target creatures you control. Return target permanent to its owner's hand. There are so many ways to put this card just completely out of control. Anything that can untap it. A Mind Over Matter, for instance. That just breaks this card completely. Anything you can do to untap it and continue to use its effect. And just bounce stuff. It's so good. Fact or Fiction. Very classic card. Another skill-intensive one. But this one kind of tests your opponent, which is really fun. For 1 blue and 3 generic for a 4 converted mana cost instant, you reveal the top 5 cards of your library. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles. You can put 1 pile into your hand and the other pile into your graveyard. They separate the piles, is where their skill comes into test. They could completely mess themselves up if they give you the wrong 2 piles. Sometimes they'll just put like the card they're afraid of in a pile by itself and put the other 4 cards in the pile, but you get lots of cards. Maybe you don't like to give the opponent choices. Maybe you like to have all the choices for yourself, and you can respect that. Maybe you're playing mono blue or a color that is just running this card because it's that good. This card is that good. This card is Cryptic Command. For 3 blue mana and 1 generic for a converted mana cost, really hard to splash this, but people still try. You can choose 2. Counter target spell. Return target permanent to its owner's hand. Tap all creatures your opponents control or draw a card. All of those are great choices. You can run over your opponents if you tap down other creatures. Countering spells is good. Drawing cards is good. You can choose 2 of those. 2 of them. Any 2 you want. Like, what this does is just so game-breaking. It's great, and you should run it. but it's also expensive. So be aware of that. This is a card that a lot of people want to get banned out of Commander, and I completely understand. But until that day, much like Prophet of Krufix, you'll know it will be run. This is Deadeye Navigator. 2 blue, 4 generic mana, for a 6 converted mana cost, 5/5 Spirit with Soul Bond. When it comes into play, you can choose another creature, and you can cause them to soul bind, and they will remain bind as long as both of them remain in play, or in control, you in control of them. Now, as long as it's paired with another creature, each of those creatures has 1 generic and a blue. Exile this creature, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. This is such combo bait. This is a combo trick. There's so much you can do with this card. So I had to pick a counter spell, and Desertion was already on here, and I thought, well, then Forbid. Like, there's not even a question. There's so many good counter spells. So many. But Forbid has buyback. And the buyback is choose to discard 2 cards in your hand. And that's generally not that hard to do when you're playing blue. And there's lots of shenanigans you do with the graveyard. But for 2 blue and 1 generic, you can counter target spell. And if you feel like there might be a threat later, you can buy it back and keep it in your hand to counter something else later. It's so good. This is a very expensive card, but it's on this list because it's also an incredibly broken card that is super amazing. I don't think it's as broken in Commander, but there's a lot of targets for it. It's a 2/1 human wizard for 1 blue and 1 other, with flash, which means you can play it whenever you want. When Snapcaster Mage enters the battlefield, target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. And flashback says you pay its flashback cost when it's in the graveyard, you can cast it again. It exiles it from the graveyard, you can't use it anymore, but you get a second use out of a spell. Snapcaster Mage gives any spell flashback. Wrath of God, Ruination, Shatter, whatever you need. Now here's a more modern, cheaper version. It's still it's like almost $20 in American terms. But it's still under the $20 limit, so I can use it, and I totally love it. It's Torrential Gear Hulk, 2 blue, 4 others. That's 6 converted mana cost for a 5/6 with flash. When it enters the battlefield, you may cast target instant card from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that card will be put in your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. Same thing as Snapcaster Mage, but it only hits instants, then it pays the spell's cost for you. You can see why that's good. Just like you can probably see why this is good, especially in a multiplayer game. This Consecrated Sphinx. It's a Sphinx for 2 blue and 4 generic. It's a 4/6 flyer. Whenever an opponent draws a card, you may draw 2 cards. That's a may. It's your choice. So you got to pay attention. But it can also prevent you from milling yourself, which is also helpful because you'll be drawing a lot of cards. Because opponents draw cards a lot, especially if you're in a multiplayer game. People want this band too, and you can see why. Like, if this sits on the board for like a turn rotation or 2, you're probably going to win, just out of sheer card advantage. I think that'll do it for our list today. That's 20 pretty good cards, I think. Let me know down in the comments. What would you use? What would you like to see on this list that wasn't here? How about this awesome Dismiss into Dream art I found on the Magic the Gathering website? All credit goes to Wizards of the Coast. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Make sure to share this with your buddies. Especially if you're on Reddit. They seem to like videos there. Until next time, it's Dottie saying, bye-bye!